Hello, everybody. Welcome. I think we've still got people kind of coming in, so I'll let you all get comfortable and logged in and make sure your audio is working all right. And then we'll get started, I think. So I'd like to start this evening with an acknowledgement of country first up. And in the spirit of reconciliation, Monash IVF acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, the sea and community. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to any and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending tonight. Welcome. My name is Claire Byrne. I'm one of I'm a senior psychologist at Monash IVF, and you can see here where Monash IVF are located all around Australia. I'm right down that bottom bit down in Melbourne, and I'm sitting here tonight on Boonwurrung lands, and it's been a lovely day here on Boonwurrung country. And so I'm very lucky to be able to live here today. And I do acknowledge that the Boonwurrung people's sovereignty over this land that I get to, lucky enough to call home, has never been ceded. You can see all our full service clinics and those sorts of things. And down here in Melbourne, we've also got a new clinic that is opening up in Cremorne. And for those of you outside of Melbourne, Cremorne is in Richmond. It's a smaller part of Richmond. But we've got a new full service clinic, and that's where actually I'm based. So lucky me, I get that beautiful view up the top there and those sorts of things. So hopefully, as I've been prattling on, you've been able to settle yourself in and make sure your audio is working and all of those sorts of things. And tonight, I guess it's a fairly, hopefully, relaxed and informal kind of night. If you do have a question you want to ask, please pop it through. You can submit it using the Q&A button, and I'll try and get through those questions as well. So yeah, pop those in the Q&A button whenever you feel like. But there'll be hopefully time for me to get through some at the end. That would be great. So like a bit about me. I'm one of the senior psychologists here at Monash IVF, and I've been working at Monash IVF and helping individuals and couples sort of navigate their fertility journeys for almost 10 years now. So I have, I guess, heard a lot of stories and a lot of experiences from people over the time. And I think this topic tonight is a really important one. There are celebrations of parenthood just everywhere these days. We've got, I've got a key one on the calendar coming up in Mother's Day pretty soon. We have Father's Day, baby showers, first birthdays, all the other birthdays. But I think first birthdays are a key one for a lot of people who are trying to conceive. That really is a celebration of parenthood in particular. And pregnancy announcements, gosh, they are everywhere. They are popping up randomly, unexpectedly on your social media feeds. People announcing at other events that you're at unexpectedly and those sorts of things. So these celebrations are everywhere. And I think tonight, I'd really like to talk to you about, my experience of talking to people who are trying to conceive and having to navigate these celebrations, and hopefully, I guess, make you feel less alone in that, because I think it is an isolating experience at times for a lot of people. So, the first thing tonight that I want to say is it's normal to find these celebrations challenging. It is. It is really challenging to navigate these celebrations when you are trying to conceive. So if you saw the topic of this webinar tonight and thought, I absolutely resonate with that, and there's a whole lot of you that have joined tonight. You're not alone in finding these celebrations hard to navigate and trying to look for strategies. So hopefully tonight we can talk about, I guess, what's normal, what's common, what are common reactions, and then maybe some ideas for you, in terms of strategies to manage and to get through those times as well. I think that these celebrations are like taking a magnifying glass. My colleague today said to me, it's like taking a magnifying glass to the one thing that you desperately want in your life. That's what these celebrations do. So it is normal for these celebrations to remind you of what you are trying so hard to achieve, and what you would like to be a part of. And it is absolutely common and normal when family and friends announce pregnancies to feel both happy for them and sad for yourself at the same time, And I think sometimes because we have these two emotions that we think are so opposite, I'm feeling sad and I'm feeling happy and those sorts of things, people tend to feel like those feelings are kind of mutually exclusive, that they can't just coexist together. But they can, those two feelings are completely valid. I can be very happy for someone and also sad for myself and what I haven't achieved and haven't got yet, So those two feelings can actually kind of coexist together, and you can hold them together. It just feels very challenging, I think, at times. And I think if you have been dealing with that for quite some time, it's also really normal to feel like your sadness almost makes it impossible to feel any happiness for other people. So loved ones who announce pregnancies and those sorts of things, it's really common for people to say, I couldn't even feel happy for them. I just felt that sadness. That's all I felt, And then it's very hard, right, to try and show them happiness, and they're kind of expecting some happiness maybe from you, and it's really, it's really hard to show that and bring that out. So those are really common experiences that people report, and exactly, so many times people tell me those same things. So if you're feeling like that at all, you are not alone. And I think the other place that makes people go to often is, I'm a horrible person. I've become a horrible person. I've become this bitter person. I've become, someone who can't be happy for other people. I've become, I feel guilty all the time. I feel guilty that I couldn't do that for my sister, for my brother, all those people. But this hasn't made you bitter. You are not a horrible person. These are normal reactions to these really challenging kind of situations. I kind of think of it's almost like an eclipse, Your sadness has sort of eclipsed any happiness, that you're feeling in that moment. So a lot of people experience that. And I think another thing that people talk to me about too is anger. So if you're sitting there kind of going, I don't get sad, I get angry, and I think that happens to a lot of people. Somebody announces a pregnancy and they talk about how easy it was, or it was an accident, and these sorts of things. And for a lot of people, up comes this anger, I'm angry that other people are falling pregnant so easily. And, I'm trying so hard, I'm doing everything that's not happening. And other people are just falling pregnant easily. I mean, I can totally understand where that anger kind of flashes up. You're not alone in that. And again, it doesn't make you a bad person, a horrible person. It makes you a human. Yeah. And really, when we think about anger, it's really just some sort of manifestation or a mask for a different emotion underneath. So oftentimes that anger is a manifestation of that sadness I was talking about before. So you're not alone in these feelings. If anything I'm saying so far tonight is resonating with you, you're not the only person. Lots of people are telling me about that, those same reactions. And then I think, another thing that people talk to me about during these times is, I came home and I came home from that celebration or that pregnancy announcement, and I just lost it. I sobbed. I laid on the bed and sobbed. I sat at the bottom of the shower and sobbed and sobbed. These celebrations are exhausting. They are depleting. It's difficult to manage. These are not easy things to do. And crying is your body's release. This is the way to discharge some of that. This is the way your body physiologically releases some of that. So if you have found yourself sobbing at the bottom of the shower or lying on the bed, you're not alone. What is that feeling that we're talking about? Because I think we should name it, because otherwise it feels kind of like, what is going on for me? People will be like, I think I'm losing it. I come home and I have these big sobbing, I'm a mess. Like I've held it together all day. And then of course, makes total sense. I've held my mask on all day at work or in that function, in that space. I held it all together and I came home and it needed a place to release, And what's being released? All of that tension, all of that sadness. And what is this? I think if we name it, it's easier to deal with. This is grief. This is grief that a lot of people are experiencing. And we don't often call it grief in fertility because, grief involves loss, but we have lost, right? Lots of people have lost on this journey, whether it's losing the dream of falling pregnant easily, like one of those people, pen on a stick, whether it's you've had a pregnancy and lost it, multiple miscarriages and those sorts of things. It's very difficult. So there is often compounded grief that people are dealing with during this time. So it may not sound all that great, but when I say these types of things are probably not supposed to be easy to cope with. This is a challenge. This is hard. And it's common I think, for a lot of people to tell me that they feel like their loved ones and people around them don't really understand what they're going through. They tell me about loved ones who are very close to them, who expect them to be super happy for their pregnancy announcements, even as they've had their miscarriage, even as their baby that was supposed to be should have been born around the same time. Their family expects them or has this, hope that they're going to be happy, for others amidst their own grief. And I think that can be really isolating and also invalidate what you're going through as well. And it's not that those family members don't love you and those sorts of things. They, I think oftentimes when family members do that, they're trying to minimize your distress and those sorts of things. But I'm here to tell you tonight, you're not alone in those feelings. And this is a common and totally normal set of responses to this type of situation. So kind of talking through that helps you feel like these reactions that you might be having if you've had anything similar to what I've been talking about tonight. Hopefully that makes you feel a little less alone, a little bit more like these are normal reactions to really challenging times. But I guess what we're here tonight too is not just to talk about that, but how do we get through those times? What strategies can we use? What tools can we use? And those sorts of things. So I'll move on to that and sort of talk about those. And I've made a few, I guess, dot points for myself there. And I think the number one thing that I would say is some sort of level of healthy avoidance of some of these events. Obviously complete isolation from everyone and everything is probably not going to be healthy. That's not a healthy choice. But some level of purposeful and healthy avoidance is going to be a good thing. you don't have to go to every celebration. You don't have to participate to the nth degree in these celebrations either, but isolating yourself from everybody that you love and connect with, that's also not so great. So where do we try and get in this middle ground? And how do we do that? How do we not attend some of these things, And sometimes you might find you have to attend them, the various pressures or whatever, or you want to attend it because it is your loved one, and those sorts of things. So one option, you get an invite to something, is just to say, you're busy. Oh, I'm really sorry, I can't make it. And, what I would say is follow that through and get busy that day. Make sure you're doing something. Another option that people can consider too is some level of openness. Baby showers are actually really confronting for me at the moment, but I'd really like to catch up with you one-on-one at some stage. Would that be okay? Yeah. So it's some level of openness as well, and being authentic about why you're not going to come this time. So you can choose between these options. You don't have to go with, the same one every time. And the other thing I'd say about that is white lies are okay. It's okay to say a white lie to get yourself out of a situation that is only going to cause you a lot of distress and pain. Yeah. So, COVID, great excuse these days. You say yes to that invite to that baby shower. Yes, great, I'll be there. And then on the day, you get a sore throat. Wouldn't want to be around a pregnant person during, if I've got a sore throat and those sorts of things. Really sorry, can't make it at the last minute. So it is okay to have those white lies. A colleague said to me too, though, if you're saying white lies, you got to remember them. So sometimes that takes up a bit of brain space and things like that as well. Just in case someone checks in on you about your sore throat or those sorts of things. But yeah, some sort of healthy avoidance of events, I think. And if you do go to an event, like what then? So you feel like, yeah, I have to, there's no option for me in this one. I do need to go to that particular celebration. So what are the tips there? I think the first one is minimize your time at that event. In advance, plan a reason to leave early. You've got somewhere else to be. You've got somewhere else to go. So make that in advance. Let them know. You can say that in advance. Oh, I'll be there. I do have somewhere else to get to, but I'll see you there. And I think some of the anxiety about some of these types of celebrations and events is you might see people you haven't seen for a while, and those sorts of things. And you're probably used to people asking inappropriate questions, the hard questions. When are you going to have a baby? When's it your turn? Those sorts of things. And so I would say to prepare for that, is to practice answers to the hard questions. So when are you going to try for a baby? Not sure. Tell me, how's your job? Right? So quick answer, redirect onto something else, onto another topic for them. Or you could try things like, again, a little bit of disclosure. That's actually a really complicated question, and I'm just here to have fun today. So tell me about your life. What's going on with you? Yeah. So practicing these answers so that you're not caught unawares when you get these hard or intrusive questions that I think a lot of people are used to getting. I've been told all sorts of horrendous questions that people have been asked at these types of events. Or you can just try not answering. Smile, switch the topic, move on. Yeah. Or depends if you're into this sort of thing, but some people like to make a bit of a game of it. Who's going to ask the most inappropriate questions? How many times are they going to ask? And what's going to be your reward if you get to a certain number of those ridiculous questions that people tend to ask at these events? So some options there for you in terms of the types of those intrusive questions, I guess, that people tend to get at these events as well. And if you've got a support person, partner, friend who's in the know, who understands, I'd try and make sure they're at these events wherever possible. and use them, so have a signal between the two of you, a little private signal, in case you need to be rescued from that horrendous conversation with great Aunt Betty, who keeps asking about children and these sorts of things. You could have a little signal, I don't know, if it's a type of person you hold hands with, a partner or somebody, you could have, we're going to squeeze hands twice and then you need to get me out of that conversation, or I'm going to, flick my hair back or something like that. So have these signals, little private signals, that your support person can help you out if you're feeling really stuck. Have your support person be the person that drags you away. Sorry, we have to leave. They're telling me we have to leave, so use them. Have them be the one that say it's time to leave, and have a plan for leaving and what you're heading off to. Sometimes in the support bingo, I was talking before about the idea of having like a game, like how many times you can get these questions, or you could have like a game of bingo with them and those sorts of things, because then at least you can be walking past each other at these events going, I've had 2, how many of you had? So trying to keep it light if that works for you. So you're at these events as well. And I think the other strategy too is to keep busy, keep moving, and for some people that's taken on a job. You're less likely to get those kind of intrusive questions and things like that if you're in the kitchen cleaning and doing the food and those sorts of things. But I guess, my feeling about those conversations is try and keep it light and superficial. Maybe just move around the room in the short amount of time you're there. Oh, hi, I've got to get around to everybody before I get going, moving around, to try and keep it light and moving on, so to speak. And I think, it is hard when people are there for those parental celebrations, and there tends to be lots of conversations about kids and babies and those sorts of things, and that can be really triggering as well. And again, it can be really good to think about ways to have like conversation starters for yourself, questions you can ask anybody. Have you seen a good movie lately? What you're watching on Netflix and things like that? Got any travel plans coming up? So have a set of questions for yourself that are easy for you to bring out in those conversations, where you can kind of at least steer the conversation in a direction that's a bit easier for you. So healthy avoidance of events. And if you are going, minimize time, get busy, practice some answers to those hard questions, use your support people as best you can, so that those events that you do feel like you need to go to, you can get through hopefully a little bit easier. But we've also got celebrations, right? We've got these big special days, Mother's Day, Father's Day, and those sorts of things. So sometimes I don't have events with them and that, but there's lots of advertising in your face and social media and all of those sorts of things. And I think sometimes, people got a tendency to just want to avoid it. I'm not going to think about it. I just won't think about it and I'll try and avoid it, But then, we have these intrusive adverts and posts and all of those sorts of things in our life. And so ignoring it doesn't make it go away. But I think if you make a plan, make a plan for these special days, and that helps you feel maybe a little bit more in control of it. For some people, like that plan might be to have what I like to call a doona day, where you bunker down. Maybe you got a good book. Maybe you've decided on something you want to binge watch on Netflix, but that's okay too. A doona day is a plan. Yeah, I'm not saying any fancy plans, but just a plan that you've decided what you're going to do with that day and how you're going to use it. For some people, it might be a list of activities they're going to do that day. Stay busy, do something nice for yourself during that day. Reward yourself. It is difficult, it is challenging, so let's have some rewards and do something nice for ourselves. For some people, it's really helpful. They focus on ways to celebrate how they already practice those core values of parenting in their lives. This thing that you really want to do and really want to be, there's lots of elements of that I think people are practicing in their lives every day. And so focusing on that on those days, your friends' kids, your nieces and nephews, your gorgeous little furball fur babies and stuff like that, focus on those other loved ones in your life, so make them a focus of that day. Or, focus on those people in your life that have been influential or have a parenting type role for you, and focus on those. If you've lost those type of parental figures, it can be really healing to do something to acknowledge them as well. I know someone who walks in the Mother's Day Classic every year to think about her mother on Mother's Day, and I think that's a really healing thing to do. So you can think about that as an option. These are all just ideas, and they're just things, you have to choose what resonates and feels, I guess, good for you. What feels all right for someone doesn't feel all right for another. So I think another important one too, or another idea for those days and to plan the day, is to actually use that day to acknowledge and honor your own grief and loss in that area. And when I say that, sometimes people are like, I don't know what that means. How would I do that? What are you talking about? For some people, it might be buying a beautiful candle and lighting it that day. And thinking about all of their dreams and desires that they've been working so hard for, and acknowledging all of that work, all of those hard challenges, all of the losses. Writing a card, writing it down, some sort of journaling, writing a letter, those types of things, or going to some sort of special place for yourself, some place that has meaning for you, so that you can honor and acknowledge this time and the challenges that you've been going through. So I guess there's some ways to kind of think about, how do you plan for those days? How do you plan for those special days? Take some control back over those days. Take some ownership back over those days when people are celebrating them. And I guess another big one that that you have to deal with when you're trying to conceive is other people's announcements, pregnancy announcements. And these announcements happen and they trigger your own grief and loss. And they can, I think sometimes when these announcements happen, you can feel like a deer caught in the headlights. It's like, I know I'm expected to kind of deliver something, say something. I'm supposed to, there's a social construct here. I'm supposed to really, be happy and say congratulations and those things. But sometimes when we're not prepared, we're a deer caught in the headlight and we can't get it out. And then later people tell me I feel awful, I didn't respond how they wanted, and those sorts of things. What's the strategy there? And I would say the strategy probably is rehearse. Prepare yourself for those expected and unexpected pregnancy announcements. Practice some sort of standard phrase, so when the announcement comes, I take a big deep breath and I press play on my auto run phrase that I say. Congratulations. That's wonderful news for you. So practicing just a standard phrase that you're going to say anytime there's a pregnancy announcement, so that you're not having that horrible sensation that people sometimes talk to me about and feeling like a deer in the headlights. And I think too, once you've said the phrase, that can be a time when your emotions come up. You might feel your eyes getting a bit teary and those sorts of things, and you might be feeling like, I don't want to do that in front of this particular person and those sorts of things. So take a deep breath. So you say the phrase, take a deep breath, try and regulate yourself, try and ground yourself, remind yourself. You can, give yourself a little squeeze, those sorts of things. And I think the other key thing there around those announcements is to have an excuse ready to leave. So just as much as you're planning the response and rehearsing the response, I think also lots of people find it really good if they've planned statements to get themselves out of that situation, even if just for a moment, oh, I just remembered I have to make a call. Great news. I'll see you in a minute. Off you go, So trying to come up with things that you've pre-prepared, so you kind of know the announcement comes, take a deep breath, say my phrase, ground myself, regulate. At the appropriate time, I make my leave and I get out of that space. So hopefully that can be some help in those responses to pregnancy announcements. I think the other thing these days that we're hit with is social media, and it may be worth at times considering some sort of social media hiatus or making a plan for what happens around social media for yourself. If you're taking a break from social media, it really does avoid advertisements for those special days coming up. It avoids unexpected pregnancy announcements flashing up on your screen, maybe in the middle of your work day, derailing your kind of work focus and things like that. It also avoids the need to like and comment and respond to people's announcements and posts and things on Facebook. But if you're committed to social media and you're on there and you just feel like I don't think I can, turn it off and get rid of the apps, then consider having some pre-prepared responses for these things. When I see a pregnancy announcement, I don't think I just press an emoji. So many of these apps now have got like pre-populated statements too. You just get there and it says congratulations. You're like, yeah, I'll take that one. So use those things. Don't think about it. Just get it. Get it done. So you can use those pre-prepared statements, or you can write down pre-prepared messages that you can copy and paste in, so that you're not having to put a lot of time and investment into those responses, if you know what I mean. And these days, a colleague of mine was showing me, that some businesses are slowly starting to realise, Mother's Day is quite triggering for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. And so they're sending emails now. Do you want to opt out of Mother's Day messages? Great, make use of that as well. I mean, how awesome. I think definitely, do that. So we've thought about, prepare, getting ourselves ready for events, avoiding events, coming up with plans to get out of it, making plans for those special days, rehearsing ready for announcements and those sorts of things. Think about your social media, get off it or get prepared for responses. But I guess the other things I'd like to say overall is, unfortunately, I'd love to be sitting on this webinar with a magic wand, but there is no magic wand. Navigating these types of celebrations when you are trying to conceive is going to be challenging. I don't think there's any way around that. And I think sometimes when I talk to people, they feel like they're not coping in this time. I'm not coping because I went home and I cried. I'm not coping because of this. And I think sometimes we've equated in life coping with like being happy and being, happy and joyful at all times. We've seemed to have equated that with coping. And coping, like if you look up definitions, it's really kind of about struggle, So if we are coping with something, we are struggling with it. It is hard. So I think on some level, maybe we need to accept that this is going to be hard. And then that might, in fact, actually make it easier rather than trying to get through this and feeling wonderful. I'm trying to get through. I am trying to cope. I'm going through this. From that, I would say we need to allow space and time to grieve and to feel. So, some people will say to me, how am I going to cope with these things? And I go home and I cry and those sorts of things. And crying is absolutely a normal physiological response to those situations. If you're feeling that anger, getting it out. That might be, for some people, going for a run, doing a boxing class, getting some of that out of your body. Yeah, all of those sorts of things can be really good ways. But allowing yourself space and time to kind of feel and grieve, and knowing that's going to come, and therefore planning for it too. So if I go to that event, I know that's going to be really challenging and hard, and I'm going to need a little bit of downtime after that. Put it in your, plan it in your time. And I guess the other thing, to think about too is to get professional help if and when you need it. So tonight I'm talking about all of these things, but and sometimes people might say to me, like, I don't know when the time to get professional help is, I would say anytime is a good time. But I am a psychologist, so but if these things are really affecting your daily life and you're not able to do things and those sorts of things, you're not able to do your sort of daily activities, if you are feeling really down and feeling those sort of depressive feelings of hopelessness and low motivation and all of those things, and that's lasting for a long time, like, that's okay. If these things, we all have these ups and downs, of course we do, but if that feels like it's going on a bit longer than a week or two, a couple of weeks, then think about reaching out. And who would you reach out to? You could reach out to your GP, who can talk about a mental health care plan, so you can see a psychologist under Medicare and those sorts of things. You could talk to, if you are already linked in with a fertility clinic, you could ask them about their fertility clinic, like counselling services. You can talk to your fertility specialist too. They are there for you as well. So if you are feeling like you're struggling emotionally and those sorts of things, you can ask your fertility specialist for recommendations. And of course, we do have other options as well. There are lots of support networks out there and things like that. And I think my lovely colleague is putting up some support services slides that are there for you as well. So some options to think about. I am going to take a sip of my water. You do the same. Or maybe you've got something nice and warm, tea or coffee. So we've got quite a lot of, got a few questions coming through. So I might launch into those and see how many of these we get through as well. I think one we got before the webinar actually was a question was, how do you navigate pregnancy announcements at work, including work-related baby celebrations, or people constantly talking about their kids or babies at work when it's painful for you? Disclosing fertility issues has sometimes backfired for me, especially when you get unsolicited advice, lovely, from co-workers or bosses. Fabulous. I was going to say, yeah, these workplace situations, I think, can be extra challenging in a lot of ways, because sometimes, disclosing that you are going through fertility treatments and things like that is not appropriate in that space and hasn't done you well before, like this person's indicating. And there can also, I think, in workplaces be a kind of high expectation for joining in and celebrating and being part of these things. And, so I think that makes it kind of sort of extra pressure and extra challenging there. And I think that's where the rehearsal of responses might be really useful here, so that you've got that, I've rehearsed that response, I'm ready for that, I think one of the benefits at work, if I can say benefits, is that usually those announcements are kind of made in a group scenario. So you can put your prepared statement in that my response that I say to everybody who announces this sort of thing. And then you can kind of step back into the group and allow the group to take over the conversation, So once that's done, you can kind of use your excuse to walk away, phone call, I've got to go to the toilet, I've got to pop out for some sort of unspecified appointment, those types of things. And those conversations in workplaces that just focus on children and over again and those sorts of things, they can also be really challenging. You can try to have those conversation starters that I sort of spoke about before, what are you having for dinner tonight? What movie you're seeing? What's your holiday plans and all those sorts of things. but it's okay too. If they keep circling back to the children and babies topics, it's also okay to make your leave and leave that conversation, I think, as well. So hopefully that's helped with that kind of workplace side, but I do agree that is an extra challenging one. And maybe, maybe like kind of acknowledging that the workplace can, for some people, the workplace can be a really challenging environment. And so maybe you are going to need that extra downtime in the evenings. Maybe it's not such a great idea to plan all this other stuff in the evenings as well, so that you've got that time and space to kind of take that mask down after work. I've got another question here. This person says, I'm finding trying to conceive my second child even more stressful than my first. My first was fortunately easy, but second is not, and I might need IVF. And I'm getting increasingly anxious about the age gap and, about my child not having a sibling and those sorts of things. I want to be present and enjoy my child, but am being consumed by the stress of trying to conceive. How do I cope with this? I'm so grateful for what I have already, so I feel guilty, but I also want more children. Oh, yeah, I know this. So many people have come through talking about this, this same thing, and it's really difficult. Whether that first child was easy or it was hard. There is a lot of guilt there. I think a lot of people have that guilt response. But I think that phrase there, I'm so grateful for what I have already, so some people will say, you should be grateful for what you've got. Of course you're grateful for what you've got. Of course you cherish what you've got. And it's okay, it's similar to what I was saying before about being sad and happy in the same thing. These things are not mutually exclusive, they can coexist. I can be super grateful for what I have and also want a sibling for that child. I think, the drive to have baby number one is huge. The drive to have baby number two is actually just as big. It's just different. But it doesn't make it any much more of a drive. So this anxiety that you're talking about and those sorts of things, and that feeling of time ticking by, so many patients talk about that, and so it can be at times focusing on that gratitude side of things, things that I am grateful for and how I'm going to work on this. But it's also time to allow yourself time to acknowledge how hard it is doing that, how hard it is trying to conceive, and I think for a lot of parents who've had a child and then can't have baby number two, or they're having a lot of trouble having baby number two, that can be really confronting as those people in your social network also start having baby number two. So there's another trigger. More parenting celebrations. They're everywhere, right? So I think being kind to yourself in that time, this is a challenging time, and a really hard one. So looking for connection, and I can tell you tonight, you're not the only person who's feeling that way. Another person said here, what about feeling numb to these announcements? So I talked about feeling sad, I talked about feeling angry. I agree. Numb is another place that a lot of people go. You're absolutely right. And I think, again, this is another common and normal response, because who's got the energy to feel sad and angry every time there's a blooming pregnancy announcement? And we go to a place where we just sort of numb it off, I think, when we're doing that we still have those feelings under there, but we're protecting ourselves. So again, I think a really normal reaction, nothing to sort of worry about in that sense, if that's what this person was feeling. Because I think lots of people have that kind of numb numb feeling about it. Yeah. And yet, you're here tonight and trying to listen to some of these strategies and things. And I think, it can be time to again allow that space to grieve and to feel. Give yourself that time and that space, because even when we are numb to it, it is a protective mechanism, and we probably have that same depletion and exhaustion from some of these events. And the next person's question here says, have you got any tips on staying positive with the constant triggers of children, babies, pregnancy, and daily life? You're right. Those triggers are out there, aren't they? You can't get through a day without one, really. And some of them are bigger than others. Some of them are closer to you than others, and those sorts of things. Yeah. And I think sometimes people are often wanting to stay positive or think positive and have positive thoughts and those sorts of things. And I don't know, like, I think sometimes that, that may be perhaps not realistic, that we can't have positive thoughts all the time. We're going to have lots of thoughts coming through. And I think, when you're being triggered like this, it's really easy to kind of get hooked by those more upsetting thoughts and those sorts of things. And so maybe this might help for some of the other questions too. But this idea of mindfulness, how do I unhook from some of those thoughts that are not really helpful to me? How do I stay in the kind of present moment? I kind of liken it. I guess everybody's from all around Australia tonight. I was about to make a Melbourne reference there, but let's think of really busy train station and you're standing on the platform. You're standing on the platform and the trains are coming in and out, and these are all your thoughts. And there might be neutral thoughts, there might be positive thoughts, there might be negative thoughts coming through. And sometimes we kind of jump on those trains. Sometimes we don't realize we've got on that train and we're all the way at the end of the line before we realize I've really got caught up in this particular thought. So when that happens, it's about, I guess, just popping off the train, getting yourself back on the platform, so to speak, and then letting that train drive away. So I don't know whether that analogy works for you, but for some other people, it's like a bookshelf, and we pull down a book, the book that's entitled, I'm Never Going to Have a Baby. And I pull the book in my face, and that's an upsetting book. I know, I've read that book. It's not nice. Is that book helpful? How do I put that book down and just put it on the shelf? So maybe it's not about staying 100% positive all the time, because I don't think that's realistic, but how do I unhook from some of those kind of unhelpful thoughts? And sometimes that's, a great thing that, going to see a psychologist or something like that, or a counsellor can kind of help you with and have, personal strategies. I've come up with a couple of analogies tonight, but they might not work for you. But that's where, having those conversations with someone, you can come up with some ideas that might be helpful. Another question here, what advice do you have for workplaces in managing pregnancy announcements? Sometimes it can be a shock to see an ultrasound in an email. Ooh, yeah. Or an announcement in a meeting. Yeah, that's a really difficult one, isn't it? You're absolutely right. I don't, like what's best practice there? Certainly, yeah. Ultrasounds in emails sound a bit confronting. I think announcements in meetings kind of feels like more a personal announcement that maybe people can be directed to make, rather than a kind of I'm sending this to the entire workplace and email content. But yeah, I'd have to think on that one a bit more, because certainly those ones you mentioned are not the way to do it, but but how do you do it? Another question here, how do you manage your own sadness? I am childless, not by choice, 2 decades after ending IVF. Yeah, the grandparent announcements are hitting me now and re-triggering that sadness. Absolutely, that's what we see. You know, I wish I could tell people that that those triggers don't end, but you're absolutely right. Those triggers come up at different points across the lifespan, and I think, you know, they're just as hard, aren't they? You know, so it is about, you know, when you say managing your own sadness, you know, is that about working out ways to honor and acknowledge the grief that you're going through? Because it does become a bit of a sort of disenfranchised grief in some way. People don't think about it, probably. Those people that are announcing their new grandbabies on the way and those sorts of things are probably not thinking about it anymore, are they? You know, it's not as forefront in their mind. But how do you acknowledge and honor that for you? You know, are there things that you can do? I was talking before about, you know, having a candle and those sorts of things, a special place, you know, somewhere that you can externalize some of that too and sit and look, you know, whether it is a special place, a special plant, a special garden, you know, those sorts of things that you can pour that into. Hopefully that's something to think about there anyway. What are some tips for people who know your situation still pressure and guilt you into going to these events? Oh yeah, that's some of the hardest ones, isn't it? You know, like people who are, you're like, they know how hard this is for me, and they're still, you know, oh, you're still calm, and those sorts of things. That can be really difficult. That's a really hard one, I think. But maybe it's, you know, it's the same responses. And I think maybe acknowledging, we talked before about that idea that some people don't get it. And even when you've told them, they still don't get it. So I kind of feel like these people still don't get it, you know, even though they know, they kind of don't seem to know clearly, because they're doing this. And so maybe we just have to treat them as people that don't get it, you know. And so maybe it is about, even with those people, using those same strategies I mentioned before, the you know, yeah, I'm coming, oh, sore throat on the day, can't make it, you know, because clearly they still don't get it, even though they're aware. They don't fully understand. And maybe it's, you know, and I have to admit, it must be very hard for people that haven't gone through it to not to understand fully. Someone here, how do you deal with comments around it being your fault? Oh, like comments at events and things, like, you know, I know, and people, like some of the horrendous comments people have told me that they've had at these types of events as well, you know, or the old, you know, you just need to relax, you just need to go on a holiday, you know, and those sorts of things. You know, but this sense of, you know, it being somebody's fault, that's a really hurtful one, isn't it? You know, and again, I guess just acknowledging that these people don't get it and going somewhere where someone gets it, you know, whether that is a counsellor, whether that is some sort of support group, whether that is, you know, talking to other people that do get it, because those people don't get it. And do we really, I don't know, sometimes I think in those situations, you really want to spend your effort kind of trying to make them get it, because sometimes that's what we do. I don't know. I certainly do at times, try and convince people to get it, but they don't get it. And maybe that's just a waste of effort as well. Yeah, and this next question here, how do we deal with an announcement from a friend, but they talk about it like it's the worst thing that could happen to them, as if it's ruined their life? So hard to take, isn't it? You've been working so hard for that same thing, and they seem ungrateful for what they've got. And I do think as a society, there's a kind of societal thing about, you know, complaining about parenting and complaining about kids and things like that. Sometimes it's a bit of a martyrdom kind of thing going on, and that, you know, that is really hurtful to listen to when that's really what you want. You're working so hard to have that. It's like, I'd be very happy to have all of those things. Thank you very much. You know, and sometimes it's about saying that, hey, we've been working for years to get what you've got. We'd love to be where you are. Just reminding them there's another perspective. And of course, I guess we have to also accept there's another perspective that they may feel it's not a great thing that's happened for them. But it is a very hard and difficult one, but maybe it is about calling it out and reminding them, hey, maybe lay off all the talk about how difficult it is and terrible it is. We've been working very hard to get there and we haven't got there yet. But it's hard to say, of course. I don't know. I don't know how close these people are or how they respond to those sorts of things. But again, these people don't get it. They don't get what you're going through. And sometimes it's also okay to just not bother trying to educate them and convince them and show them. I was going to say, someone here has got, should you be feeling positive and hopeful after each round of fertility treatment? Going through a cycle of IUI or IVF, is it okay to feel numb or cautious? Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's totally understandable, right? I think sometimes when people, enter fertility treatment, they might feel excited and hopeful. And if it hasn't worked and it hasn't worked and it hasn't worked, of course you start to not have that same level of hope and excitement and those sorts of things. I think that's really normal. And again, it comes down to this idea of I don't think it's realistic to go through these treatments and feel positive and always hopeful and positive about it. I think it's normal at times to feel worried, to feel anxious, to feel not hopeful. And that is okay too. I guess it's what you do with that. How do you manage that and those sorts of things? And that's where your sort of coping strategies come in and making space for that and allowing for that. But then thinking that there's something wrong with me because I'm not feeling hopeful. And if other people around you are feeling hopeful, sometimes, if I'm talking to couples, one person's the hopeful person, the other person's the pessimistic person, and maybe just allow them to do their thing. For some people, that's their way of coping. For a lot of us, we cope by planning and we cope by, I'm going to expect the worst and hope for the best. And those sorts of things. And we think that's going to protect us from feeling disappointed sometimes, I think. Does it work? I'm not so sure. But yeah, it's a very common coping strategy as well during treatment. How do you maintain friendships with your friends when they all have kids and for them it's all about their kids? Yeah, that's a hard one too, isn't it? And I think it's about this balance. I was talking before about that balance. We don't want to completely isolate ourselves from our friends and cut them off and those sorts of things. But equally, we don't want to put ourselves often into situations that are, really, really tough. So I think, what was I going to say, trying to siphon out time with those people, when they don't have their kids. Organising those sorts of events. Hey, let me take you out without the kids, and those types of things. It's not always possible, and it's not as possible, probably on a frequent basis for them. But even those moments, I think that's a real point of connection when you can get those friends maybe out without the kids, and just have some time one-on-one kind of thing. I've got another one here. Any additional advice or tips? Or tips for navigating through this journey while working in the early childhood sector? I'm surrounded day in, day out by babies, announcements, etc. I'm okay for the most part, but sometimes it's really hard. I'm really open and honest about my journey and where we're at with it. I've recently found myself when working or near the nursery that I suddenly get visions or strong feelings about the little girl we lost at 10 weeks. Oh, of course you do. Of course you do. I love my job. I love the children, but sometimes it just feels too unfair that these children get my love and my own babies didn't. It does make sense. I think you said at the end there, if that makes sense, it absolutely makes total sense. You know, and you lost your little girl at 10 weeks. I would say that that little girl felt your love. So you gave that little girl your love. Absolutely. But I can totally understand those triggers in the workplace, and this workplace that all gives you joy also triggers this grief and loss. It's a real hard one, and I have that not only with people that work in the early childhood sector, those people that work, you know, in NICU, in you know, midwives. You know, you're not alone in that. Absolutely, it's a really hard one. You know, and you know, for some people that focus on those values that they have, those parenting values, and I can hear that when I was reading out your question there. You know, I think those times when you're at your work and you're focused on those core values of parenting and teaching and educating and raising, and you get to live a lot of those through your workplace, which is beautiful. But you're absolutely right, it's going to trigger that too. And I think, you know, those ideas of acknowledging that and making space for that, you know, your workplace is going to keep doing that, but it also brings you great fulfillment and joy. I can hear that at the same time. So it's probably, how do I balance those two things, I think. I was going to say, oh, yes, another great question. Do you have any suggestions for a mother who keeps saying she never had a problem getting pregnant? Why is everyone having trouble these days? And what are they doing wrong? It was easy in my day. Oh, dear. Yes, those generational assessments and those sorts of things. Oh, they're tough. You know, the kind of desire to educate somebody like that is strong. Well, it is in me anyway. You know, but equally, I think that the conversation we had before about, you know, some people just don't get it. So do we really want to expend our energy there, and those sorts of things, you know? And maybe just some, you know, flippant comments there. Oh, yes, it was easy for you, everybody in your day. Nobody had problems in your day. Okay, thanks very much. You know, maybe rather than, you know, trying to change that mindset, you know, in a more like overt way. But yeah, they can be really, really difficult. Yeah, and more hurtful comments, you know, from families here. You know, my mum said it was my fault, I'd left it too long to have a child. Oh gosh, you know, honestly, the types of comments people have had, you know, and you know, it's hard sometimes to see, you know, where that's coming from. I think people do look for reasons in life. I think humans are always looking for reasons. It's hard for us as humans to just leave, you know, leave things and say, well, I don't know why it's not happening. They want to find blame. That feels more in control than a world that doesn't have answers. You know, and so sometimes I wonder if people kind of apportion blame, and sometimes and I'm going to gender stereotype, but I would say a lot of women will blame themselves, because it's almost, at least then I'll blame myself for this, even though there is no explanation. They blame themselves, and maybe that's part of that wanting control, and not just it being an unknown reason. You know, it's hard to say why those things happen, but those comments are hurtful. And I think finding some people in which you can get that support from, you know, can really help. And I think similarly here, I see another person saying, how do you deal with a partner who doesn't understand why you're struggling with something like your sister-in-law's baby shower? He expects me to attend and be present, It is not acceptable for me to make excuses to leave and also not detract from their day by being emotional. Yeah. How do you get him to understand how hard it is? I don't know. Play this webinar. I think there was a lot of people on here tonight and a lot of questions, a lot of people saying the same thing. This is absolutely hard. And if your partner can't get that, I hope you hear very strongly tonight me telling you it is. Yeah. And okay, so maybe we have to also deal with a person like that. Again, this person doesn't get it. They don't get it. So, you know, maybe it is about, oh, gee, you know, I've got that sore throat, you know, I'll come and drop off the present. So, and those sorts of things. So, maybe just trying to utilize some of those other things, that. Yeah, somebody's written there, self-care is not selfish. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what was I going to say? Still got a few questions to go here. I'll see if I can get through some of them. Somebody here says, I'm currently navigating a solo pathway, still grieving that situation in itself. Absolutely. A lot of grief, I think, for those people who are navigating the solo pathway for sure. I'm struggling to open up to friends who are aware of the path I'm on. Sometimes I feel like I need to talk and want to talk, but don't want to be the one to raise it and just wish they would actually ask how it's all going. How do you best communicate these needs? I think you've done a beautiful job right there. Yeah. For some people, it's calling it out, and saying, I really need to talk about it, but I don't really want to raise it. Maybe it's easier to do that in a text message or an email. Next time I see you, maybe you could ask me about it, and putting that out there, because I think you've done a great job in communicating that need, and I totally get it. Maybe you don't want to talk about it all the time, but it'd be nice if those people did ask you about it sometimes. And maybe, and I think, if I'm being kind to those people, they might be like, oh, if I ask her about it, it's not going well, maybe she doesn't want to talk about it, and those sorts of things. So I think those people who are there and who support you and love you, I think you can put that out there, and you might not want to bring it up verbally, but sometimes a text message and those sorts of things, tonight when we're out at coffee, can you ask me about this? I don't often like to bring it up, but sometimes I want to talk about it too. See how that goes. The next person here says, there have been a few pregnancy announcements this year. One was an accident, a happy one. One was an accident, a sad one, but they decided to keep it. But there was one where it was an accident and they decided to abort. Then an aunt, they should have had it and could have kept it. How do you deal with these situations? Yeah, there's a lot there. Like I was saying before, even those accidents that are happy for those people, that's really hard. And I think a lot of people struggle when they have somebody that has decided to end their pregnancy. When you're trying to conceive, it's a very hard one. We have to really, step outside ourselves and know that someone else's world is not ours. And those sorts of things, and those decisions, are probably very hard for those individuals, but it's very hard when you're trying to conceive to understand that too, So just as we were saying before, there's lots of people that won't understand the trying to conceive journey. I think too, it's also very hard when you're on this side to see those other perspectives as well. Absolutely. How do you cope with inadequacy as a woman when advertising is basically saying you're only a woman if you have children, especially at Mother's Day? Oh, you're so right. All those ads, it's shocking, isn't it? And Mother's Day is the hardest, And I would say trying to take a hiatus from places that are going to have ads. And I know that's not like possible completely, but if you can minimize that, I think social media, having a hiatus from social media absolutely will minimize a lot of that. Not opening up emails and all of those sorts of things. I think those messages that people are getting are really difficult. But I think taking yourself out of that, don't put yourself in those environments where all that sort of stuff is. More about social media. People who are posting pictures of their kid every day on social media, again, very triggering, and maybe, there's lots of things you can do right on social media. You can hide them from your feed, so you're just not seeing those daily posts with that person's kids, so again, kind of trying to take yourself out of that. I was going to say, and another person here, I work in the disability sector, and my manager is the client's mum, so very close with her. And wondering if you had any tips on how to deal with her comments on "I'm too young" or "put your career first." But at the same time also knows my struggles with stage 3 endometriosis. These are hard, isn't it? People that kind of seem to know, but then say other things and say the opposite of what, you like, but you kind of know this stuff. And again, I think, thinking about, these types of comments, there's a generational gap there, I suspect as well, and there was, I think, a very big social drive for women to put their career first and don't have children too young and things like that. But we also now know and have lots of research about the impacts of age on fertility, and you need to make the decision that's right for you. And again, this might be another person that doesn't really get it, and can sometimes you can educate people and let them know, and other times you can't, and maybe it's about sort of just disconnecting from some of those things and disconnecting from those comments. And I think, again, this sort of pressure, another question here about pressure of having a baby at the right age, but life doesn't work out like that, does it? You've got to meet the right partner at the right time. Where's your career at? All of these pressures that we're dealing with about timing and those sorts of things. I think that's a really hard one. What else have we got here? Do you know where we can find any books or resources to support during a fertility journey that aren't religious based? Everything I find seems to be linked to the idea that it's all on God's time and trust. Wow. I was going to say, I think there's lots of fertility support out there that isn't religious based, and now you're testing me on a Thursday night to come up with it, of course, off the top of my head. If you did want to send us an email and you can say I attended the webinar and I can organise to send you through some other resources, because I'm absolutely sure we can find some that would suit you better for sure. I was going to say, somebody who's asking, would it be possible to get a link to the recording afterwards? And I'm pretty sure my lovely colleague Meg will be sending that out to you. And one last one here. Somebody says, my mum says I shouldn't tell anyone that I'm working with Monash IVF. Is she correct? And how do I disclose this eloquently when I'm at events and face these conversations? Yeah, the issue of the disclosing about your fertility treatments, I do see people that have told everybody that they're undertaking fertility treatment. I see some people that have told absolutely no one. And I would say both of those extremes have their downsides. If you've told everybody, everybody's asking questions, it feels like a lot of pressure and those sorts of things. If you've told no one, you've got no connections, and how do you authentically kind of connect with people sometimes, and when you do want support, maybe it's harder to get because people didn't know. and how can they acknowledge it if they don't know? So I guess that's a really personal thing for each person, but it kind of sounds like this person would like to disclose. And I would say, it doesn't have to be done at events. It could be done more one-on-one. I've also had people send emails around and things like that, because it was easier for them to get it all out in the email to describe what they've been going through and their journey and those sorts of things. But it's definitely an individual choice, and whilst your mum might be thinking it's better to keep it private, that may not be for you. That might not work for you. And so maybe talking, and initially picking some people that you think might be good people to tell this information to. Usually you can kind of predict the people that are going to be the right people to tell this information. Who's trustworthy enough to have that information, who will honor that information and help me out through that time. So yeah, I guess thinking about that. So I think tonight, we've had lots of people writing in with their experiences. I think that, what was I going to say, this, this really shows that people are feeling the same way, are having the same struggles, lots of people with similar themes going on here tonight. So, have a think. They'll, Meg could send the recording around as well, but, have a think about some of those strategies. Things that I've said tonight might not work perfectly for you, but you might tinker with them and come up with something. I think sometimes when I go to webinars like this, I always come away with some little thing. And don't forget to, think about those external supports and those sorts of things, because, you could kind of continue this conversation and thinking, but tailor it more specifically to you. I want to thank everybody for their fabulous questions tonight and coming along and listening. I do hope you got something out of it. And I wish you all the best in this journey and this time with these parenting celebrations coming up. And, really encourage you to focus on it and make a plan and take care of yourselves through that time. All right. Thank you so much. Good night.